I'm Hemant Mehta.
This is Jessica Bluemke.
And you're listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com.
We're joined today by Dan Arel, who has written articles about religion, science, and politics for websites like Salon, Alternet, and the Huffington Post. His first book, called Parenting Without God, was released in August. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
So I'd actually like to kick off. I feel like we've spoken to another author who's written a book about parenting without God. Why is that? You know, you're talking to two people without kids here. What is it about being a parent that makes people feel like they need a guide or a non-God guide?
I think a lot of it stems from the society that you're in. So, you're engulfed in this Christian society, or even in different parts of the U.S. Even you could be in more like a Muslim culture, and et cetera, et cetera. And you tend to feel lost on certain aspects of how do I teach my kid to interact with kids of other faiths that may want to tell them, well, you're going to hell for this, or they're going to come home with these questions about am I going to hell because I don't believe in Allah, or I don't believe in this God? And it's hard. It can be tricky to navigate that. And I think I'm not the only one who's tried to tackle this subject, but I think it's an important subject that people need to address and figure out exactly how to raise kids who are bright thinkers who don't necessarily grow up thinking how we do, but have learned how to think so that they grow up to be the best person they can be.
I imagine that teaching a kid, not to fear hell or to talk to them about some basic questions. Like Jessica and I could probably do that now. If you asked us what advice would you have, to raise some kids in a secular way, we could totally come up with that.
Super experts.
Oh, yeah, totally. Well, I'm wondering, you actually have kids, and what have you learned from actually having kids that maybe neither one of us would have ever imagined, oh, that's the thing I need to teach them?
Mm-hmm.
It comes more, I think it's easy to address, here's how you would talk about how hell doesn't exist. But I think it's a lot different when the kid or the person asking you has a legitimate fear. And it's easy to dismiss it, but it's harder to do it when it's something that they're actually afraid of, when a simple explanation may not suffice because they go, okay, so my dad says it's fake, but they're still afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they still want to, and then they want to know how to understand death and what happens after you die. And it becomes tricky when a more static answer may not work. When you give them the right answer, but then they're like, yeah, but how do we know this? How do we know that? And then it becomes a more of a critical thinking process where you have to start asking them questions and kind of get them to the point where they kind of talk themselves out of being scared rather than just telling them not to be scared. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess that's something I never thought of because, for example, when I was little, my parents assured me very much that there was no monster in my closet that was going to try to eat me, but I was nonetheless scared of it, even though they were like, chill out, you're fine. I guess I never thought of it that way, that even if you tell your kid, like, hey, there's no hell, you're fine.
They're not just going to accept that and smile and walk away.
Right. I never thought of it that way.
Right. Especially since we're trying to teach them also to even question what we tell them.
Yeah.
So if you teach them that and then you tell them something, you can't expect them to just believe it at face value because you just told them not to believe everything you say at face value. And so there just becomes a whole tricky road of you just created your own little monster that doesn't want to listen to anything you said.
Yeah, I would actually ask you that question. Why, obviously we all want to, we want to make sure people question authority and, make choices for the right decisions. But how can you tell a 5-year-old, everything an adult says isn't always 100% true, but then you're like, also
by the
you
way,
have to eat your broccoli. And they're like, no, question authority, rebel.
It has a lot to do with releasing that kind of info at certain ages. Mm-hmm. So maybe, at 5, you can gauge that maybe your son doesn't quite understand, or son, I have a son, so I always say son, but that your child doesn't quite grasp the idea of questioning authority, so you can't really drive that point too far home because they're unable to distinguish from, one person to the next and how to decide who to listen to. And so at that point, you're kind of still navigating I very much advocate to never say because I said so, but you're sort of in that realm where if they want to do something and it's wrong, you kind of have to lay down that rule that this is our rule for now. And then as they get older, you can kind of expand on that and why it's a rule, and have them ask questions and go back and forth to figure out if maybe you're wrong about maybe a guideline you've set for your child. If they're questioning back, why have you told me I can't stay out this late, X, Y, and Z, and then you guys have a dialogue and realize, well, maybe they are more mature than you thought and can stay out later. Mm-hmm. And, it goes into all different aspects of life, but it's a lot to do with gauging where your child is based on age and, their own intellect.
Mm-hmm.
You come from a religious family yourself, right? Were you? I read you were raised as a Pentecostal.
Yes, I sure was. I went to Christian school for quite a few years and grew up in the church.
How did you make the change from all of that to completely, doing the 180?
It kind of happened. I don't have one of those really awesome. I woke up one day and boom, I was an atheist, or not one big catastrophic event, but I started questioning things I would say right around freshman year of high school. I really started to questioning my parents' religious beliefs and how could they be true if there was this kind of suffering. And I didn't at that point think to reject a God of any kind. I just thought maybe there was a different religion out there that was meant for me. And I started exploring religions, and through that led myself eventually to realizing that, well, they can't all be right, but they can very much all be wrong. And through this whole journey, one day I just was like, you know what? I think they're all wrong. And then kind of just, from there, just gradually fell into place that I just didn't believe anymore.
We share a very similar journey in that regard. How did your parents take that? Did you tell them when it happened?
Yeah, I was pretty upfront about it. I never really hid it from them, and they were accepting. My dad didn't seem to care at all. And I think later, just a few years ago, he very much openly said, I'm an atheist as well. Oh, wow. And so I think for him, hearing it from me was just more like him saying, oh, well, duh. But he kind of let my mom, who was very religious, kind of go down that path. She worked for the church and things like that. So it was just kind of part of our life. And my dad never really bothered to say, like, oh, what if this is wrong? He grew up Catholic, so it was just natural for him, I think. And my mom was just, she's super supportive. She still claims to be religious. I don't really think she goes to church or anything like that. But she, when my book came out, she was online bragging about her son, the author, showing the book. Nice. She shares my articles all the time. She's super proud of what I've done and has no quarrel or problem, talking about it with other people. She doesn't worry about church friends rejecting her for what her son does. So I'm lucky in the fact that I have very, very supportive parents.
Yeah, that's actually kind of a nice story to hear. I feel like we hear a lot of stories of, I haven't talked to my parents in 30 years or things like that. So obviously you're not going to send your own son to any sort of religious school for obvious reasons, but how do you feel about the fact that you went to a Christian school? Do you feel like you've lost out on some education, or that you kind of learned something that's valuable to you?
A little of both, because I feel like it probably set me back a little bit as far as understanding certain things like science, where when going into high school, when I went to a public school, I was still had that idea in my head that the Earth was created in 6 days, and that dinosaurs and humans most likely coexisted. And it's because when I went to a Christian school, when we would watch a science video, they would fast forward through parts of the videos that they didn't agree with. Or they would stop them to explain to us why it's wrong. I wasn't taught that evolution was a lie. I was taught that it was something that was thought to be true and then proven false later.
Really?
So it's kind of taught to me as something that was discarded. So it was never even like, there's people that believe in this, and they're crazy. It was, people thought this was true for a long time, but it's a discarded idea. No one believes in it anymore.
That's an interesting approach.
Like the worldview I had, which is really strange. But now I use it. So I can look back and think about how I was taught and use that when I'm writing or talking. And so it benefits me now, but then, when I went to high school, I was really behind when it came to things like science. I just had a very lacking understanding of what was going on in the world around me.
Do you think that gives you a special insight when you write things about, say, Ken Ham and the Creation Museum? Because you've been there. You've been in that position where you were taught those ideas. So do you have any special take on it because of that?
I think it helps. Because I didn't get really engulfed in the fact, like, it wasn't something I obsessed about. I just accepted it and moved on. So it wasn't like I was sitting there thinking, like, oh, creationism is true and I need to focus on that. Just because I wasn't taught that there was an opposing view, I was never really taught to argue about it. So that kind of came later. So I don't think it really helps, but it helps me understand what they think, at least. So, like, I can kind of understand how they're taught, and then I can kind of tackle it in that sense. But I don't really have the ability to counter argue as if I was someone raised in that situation.
Let's change gears for just a second here. Let's talk about your other writing for a second. Because you've written for so many different web publications, and we mentioned a few up front, but Salon, Alternate, Huffington Post, is when you know you are going to write a piece for one of those sites versus even your own blog, do you change how you are writing the piece, and how does it change depending on which audience you're writing for?
Yeah, I very much do, and it depends on how much I know opinion they'll let slide. So when I'm writing for Alternate, they tend to be really okay with me being very opinionated. As long as I kind of cite the news source and then deconstruct it, they're totally fine with that. Someone like Salon, they want a little bit less. They'll still let me do it, but it has to be a bit more science-based with them. So it depends on, I will pitch what's right to the right place, too. Like Alternate, it's atheism and religion. Salon, I know they want science and, they love, like, anti-vaccine debunking and things like that. And so, yeah, I do change my tone depending on who I'm pitching the story to, just because I know what I can get away with. Salon and Alternate are very liberal, so I know I can bash on conservatism, and people aren't going to hate me for it on that site.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you write about anti-vaxxers. That's one of those things that it's so rich for fodder. There's so much going on, but do you ever feel like you're kind of repeating yourself? Like, I feel like
how many different ways are there to debunk? Like, no, get your kids vaccinated.
That's argument they have.
It's one sentence. That's all you got to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets a little tedious, but I feel also it still stays important, even if I am repeating myself, because every time a new article goes viral that says something bad about vaccines, I feel like there's always going to be that new group of people that see it that may have ignored previous ones. So even if I do have to repeat myself a bit, and some people might read it and say, oh, he's already said this, I'm not looking to get to them because they already think that way. I'm looking to grab that person that just happened to see the newest article on Natural News that their friend posted and think that might be true. And then hopefully they see mine and say, oh, wait, like maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. And so, you are repeating yourself, but I think if you can save one kid from getting a vaccine-preventable disease, then it was worth it.
This is a little tangent to that story, but last night on television, I was watching Shark Tank, and it was an episode where a guy came in and he pitched his invention of what looked like a wristwatch, but it was supposed to impart negative ion energy for you.
Sure.
And, total pseudoscience. And Mark Cuban, one of the panelists, said that right up front. He's like, I don't want any part of this because it's a scam. And all the rest of the sharks soon followed. Half of them were just making fun of this guy. And the rest of them are like, we're not interested because you can't back this up. But the funny thing is, as soon as I was like, I remember that episode because I remember when it originally aired a couple years ago, I wrote a piece about like, oh, that's really cool to see on a TV show that all these panelists called him out on his bullshit.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, that episode was airing, as that clip was airing the other night, I could see that traffic on my website for that one post was going up a little bit because people were saying, oh, what is this watch? And they were coming onto my article where I said, yeah, it is BS. And I think, Dan, I've had that same experience too then where, yeah, it's okay if you rewrite the same stuff over and over because it does reach a different audience all the time.
Well, I mean, your questionable taste in TV notwithstanding, it's great to see that, like, on TV, there are people who are promoting science in
the
way.
most unusual places,
And
too. Like, I wasn't watching Mythbusters. I was watching, a show that's ostensibly not about science.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty reassuring, I guess, right?
Yeah. Dan, what is your media diet? Like, because you're so invested in writing about religion and science and politics, what do you read to inform yourself? What do you listen to? What do you watch?
Very depressing stuff. So I do a mix. I have probably an equal parts of liberal or left-wing media with a lot of science sites. So, Nature and Scientific American, because I like to watch the good news kind of flow in, and because I can find stories in there. But then, I also follow things like the Washington Times. Surprise, surprise, I follow Ken Ham's blog like glue. Me and Ken Ham have a special relationship, and
Ken Ham has a special relationship with everybody. Also, reality.
But so I try to follow both sides, and then I try to read a story, and then I try to look for that story inside of it. I don't like to completely just reinvent the news and say, oh look, Ted Cruz said something dumb, and then just rewrite that Ted Cruz is something dumb. Sometimes it's fun just because it is nice to just vent once in a while and make fun of, really stupid people that say really stupid things. But I like to look for that little piece in there where they say something that I'm like, why didn't they expand on that? And then I try to expand on it. But yeah, my media diet is about 50-50, where I try to read a lot of right-wing stuff and then a lot of left-wing stuff and just try to dissect what I can out of it. But the right-wing stuff will really keep you up at night.
I think what's interesting is I think we all are familiar with like right-wing nonsense that usually revolves around science education and things like that. But like the left is making a strong showing in the craziness in terms of like the anti-vaccinations and the, chemicals are a bad thing. What is going on that people are getting so anti-science on both sides of the aisle?
That's a good one. I just wrote an article, I think last week, the week before, about that, because I got the chance to interview Neil deGrasse Tyson a couple weeks ago.
Ooh.
And
I feel the same.
I said to him something along the lines of, there's a lot of science denial coming from the right in U.S. politics, and he stopped me right there.
Mm-hmm.
And he went on for about 15 minutes about left-wing science denial.
Yeah.
And he went into, he just got into that controversy over GMOs. Mm-hmm. And, he talked about anti-vaccine. And, we place a lot of science denial on the right, and there is a lot there. I mean, a lot of them deny evolution. They really deny climate change. But he made the good point that when the right is in charge, they spend more on science than anybody else. They just spend it on different science. Military research and things like that.
Gun science.
But it is science that he argued.
And he's taken a pretty strong anti-political thing, that he's an advocate of science no matter where it's coming from. He doesn't care really which party's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, yeah. He reiterated that quite a few times. I tried to push the left out of him because I know it's there. But he's too well trained.
He's heard these arguments before. Having written this stuff for a while, and I wonder the same thing myself sometimes. Do you see a change happening? When you write about issues like creationism, right-wing politics, something like that, do you see it getting better, or do you just think all of us we're all noise, none of it's helping? Do you ever get that pessimistic?
Once in a while I do, but I think if I really stop and look at it, I think it is getting better, because I kind of look at the tactics that are being used. So when you watch, Ken Ham or any creationist organization in any state, they're trying to get sneakier and dirtier to sneak their, intelligent design or creationism into the classroom. They have to now kind of disguise what they're doing even more than they have before. Mm-hmm. And I think the more that we make them have to do that, the harder it gets for them, because we keep calling them out for it because we're tracking them that closely. And when I see that happening, it makes me feel better, because it means that they can't be open about what they're doing because the public's not on their side anymore.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of started with... Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and if they have to go to those tactics to that extent, then I think that shows that we're winning more than sometimes we feel like we are.
Mm-hmm. What I was going to say is that kind of started even as far back as, creation. It used to be creationism, then it became intelligent design, and then, like, people...
Now we're teaching the controversy.
Ugh, I hate when people say that.
But yeah, so, sometimes I do get very pessimistic, and, like, I see the upcoming elections where it looks like the right's going to, the Republicans are going to take a big majority and take back the House and the Senate. But at the same time, I have to remember that we still have a Democratic president, which means that even if nothing's going to get done, no bad stuff can really get pushed through because he can stop it.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like we're probably going to keep that cycle going of Democratic presidents because the right's not putting up very good candidates.
No.
And so even if things do get pessimistic in the sense that we're not getting anywhere, I think as long as they're not doing massive damage, quote unquote, because there's still damage they can do by not passing laws, but things can't get terribly worse. If we lose it all, good night, we're in trouble, but we haven't got to that point yet.
Let me ask you about that. Yes, it doesn't look like Republicans have a formidable candidate for 2016 as we speak right now, but it seems to me like the people who are even being considered as candidates are so far to the right that they would never win over the mainstream. Right. From a purely strategic point of view, they have to know that. And I wonder, why does it seem so hard to find a candidate who is Republican, but who actually might be able to reach out? The first name that comes to mind is someone like John Huntsman, who didn't have a showing the last time around, partly because of that. He was too liberal for the GOP. Why, even from a strategic perspective, can they not get a better candidate?
I don't know if it's that they cannot, but I think general consensus is that no one that they have that's a big name right now can beat Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's little doubt Hillary's going to run, and if she runs, I think she's going to win. And I think she's going to win by a pretty big amount. I mean, the Clintons are, given even the controversy around Bill, they're still pretty well liked. She's pretty well liked, even with the Benghazi stuff that the right's trying to throw at her. And I think they're too afraid. If they put up too great of a candidate and then they get squashed, then they've kind of wasted that candidate. Mm. So I think if they put the craziest people forward now, after Clinton, if they put someone a bit more moderate, they're going to look amazing.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you one bit. I think one thing that I just don't understand from a political perspective is I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to nominate someone who seems just really ridiculously to the right. And what I really don't get about it is I know how that person may appeal to the base. Mm-hmm. I'm sure any candidate they put up will appeal to their base. But if you're trying to win over people in the middle, you have to imagine that women's rights, women's issues are going to be then a major source of discussion in the election. And I can't imagine any of these guys that they would get to run would do a good job of discussing those things. Like, they're not going to win over those independents. And I just don't understand, if you're a Republican strategist, like, you have to be going crazy right now.
Oh, they have to be pulling their hair out because the party did get in trouble by pushing themselves too far right. Mm-hmm. And I think to a degree, they're actually not sure how to come back to the left, because when you push yourself that far, you suddenly can't backtrack on all the things that got you there. You have to kind of slowly do it. And I think they have to first become unafraid of the Tea Party. And right now they're petrified of the Tea Party. So when the Tea Party tells them to go further right, instead of fighting it, they go further right so they can get reelected. Mm-hmm. And I think they're kind of digging themselves in a hole. And I don't know how. I don't really want them to get out of it. I don't know how they're going to get out of it. But I mean, we do need some more moderates on their side that can stop the whole craziness of let's just deny all global warming. Let's just go full free market. Let's forget minimum wage. We can't let that happen because they're just going to keep us at a stalemate like they are. Mm-hmm. And so we do need more moderates to come in. But from their point of view, I don't know how you do that. You're going to have to start replacing everybody in there with a moderate. And that's going to be hard to do when you've set a lot of your core base up to think, look how far right we can go. Now let's go left a little bit.
Do you think they're still going to be fighting the gay marriage equality issue by then? I mean, it's still like more than a year away from really campaigning, but are they still going to be fighting that battle?
I think that they're going to be a little bit more strategic about it. I think they're going to fight it in the states that they need to, but I don't think that they're going to be going to a purple state that maybe has, openly supported it and argue that. I think they might go there and talk about something else like employment or, Iraq or something like that, where they can kind of try to go after the independents in that sense. I think that they're going to try to do it state by state, where before they were a bit more, let's make this constitutional. I think they know that fight's over. And I think now they realize that it's going to be a states issue and that they need to just try to focus on winning those purple states using whatever tactic that state cares about the most.
All right. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us. For everyone listening, Dan's book is called Parenting Without God, and we will post a link to that on our website. Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. That was a pleasure.
Thanks, Dan.
You've been listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com. This episode was taped at Cinnamon Sound Studios in Aurora, Illinois. The music was composed by Brad Chagdis. If you like what you're hearing, please consider making a contribution at patreon.com/Hemant. That's He-Man T. We appreciate your support. I'm Hemant Mehta.
And I'm Jessica Blimke. We hope you'll join us next time.